By the time humans arrived at Edda, the world had already disappointed half the galaxy. Threxul engineers had drilled, blasted, and probed the planet's strange stone architecture. Auric sense weavers had floated above the dust, listening for subtle fields. Gyron analysts had mapped gravity ripples with obsessive precision. Each civilization left with the same report: vast buried structures, faint power signatures, no obvious controls. Edda was officially catalogued as a long-term curiosity. Useful for tenure, not for strategy. When the Terran Pact joined the Trispiral Council, the files on Edda were passed to them as a courtesy, more symbolic than practical. Humans, the older powers had decided, were talented improvisers and fierce fighters, but not subtle enough for a problem that had resisted such refined minds. The joint expedition that finally returned to Edda reflected those assumptions. The Auric carrier Soft Current and the Gyron detachments led the scientific effort. The Threxul warship Taloned Omen provided security. The human research cruiser HSS Palimpsest was allowed to contribute personnel and equipment, but not leadership. Captain Nura Badawi watched the gray-brown sphere of Edda swell in Palimpsest's forward viewport and kept her irritation under control. The expedition charter, negotiated line by line, made it clear: non-human command would decide objectives. Humans would provide muscle and technical assistance. Behind her, Dr. Ilias Kade studied the planet in silence. He was broad-shouldered, long-limbed, bearing old scars that his uniform could not quite hide. Years earlier, he had commanded infantry through urban hellscapes on distant worlds. After too many pointless victories, he had turned toward archaeology, convinced that the past might teach his species a better way forward than another weapons upgrade. Now he watched Edda's ruin fields flicker on the hollow, stone rings, half-buried pillars, the vast chamber marked in old files as the Hall of Still Suns. "It doesn't look dead," he said quietly. Nura glanced at him. "The council says it's inert." "The council couldn't hear a whisper if it wasn't in a committee report," he replied, then caught himself and added, "No offense." "Plenty taken," Nura said, fighting a smile. "Try not to start a diplomatic incident until we're in orbit." The other human specialists clustered in the forward section. Pavel Imani, a systems engineer who could coax life from almost anything dead. Isol Karun, a linguist with a knack for finding patterns in alien symbols. Kyra D. Lamini, a journalist with a small camera and a sharp observational eye. Their roles, officially, were support and documentation. The real authority belonged to Tsul of the Tides, the Auric xenologist who had advocated for this last expedition to Edda, and to Skal Draenith, the Threxul envoy whose scaled visage already dominated coalition briefings. Eric Shar, Gyron tactician, had been assigned to maintain balance between factions. The first days on the surface went according to the expectations of those who had written humans off. Under a pale sky, long modular habitats rose beyond the ruined field. Auric buoys floated above hydration pools. Gyron drones glided overhead. The Hall of Still Suns loomed at the edge of the basin, a forest of dark pillars ringed by half-buried polyhedral blocks. Up close, the pillars' engravings shimmered faintly. When the wind shifted, they produced low, almost musical vibrations. The crownstone, the scattered relics, were strangely uncomfortable to look at, their angles seeming to slide away from focus. Standard protocols unfolded. Alien teams scanned with exotic instruments. Drones mapped subsurface cavities. The first week brought new data but no breakthroughs. Humans, officially, carried equipment, logged readings, and provided security. Unofficially, Ilias, Pavel, and Isol spent long hours in the hall, walking between pillars, running their own modest sensor sweeps. Ilias moved with a slow, attentive stride, pausing often to brush his fingers over carved stone. He felt faint humming in his bones, like the aftertaste of distant thunder. "These aren't just decorations," he said to Isol one morning. "Each pillar is aligned to something deeper. They're like terminals." "More than that," Isol replied, eyes scanning inscriptions. "It's a language you read with position as much as with marks. The distances between pillars, the angles, they matter. Or you're seeing poetry in random noise," Skal said, passing by with two Threxul guards. His forked tongue flicked briefly. Dominion teams mapped this place decades ago. All it offered us was wasted time. Maybe you asked the wrong questions, Ilias murmured. Skal's eyes narrowed. Do not overestimate your kind, human. Impulse and improvisation have limits. Those limits showed on the 8th day when Ilias pushed himself too hard. A fissure had opened on the hall's northern edge after a small tremor. Council protocols discouraged unauthorized exploration, but time was short and Ilias' instincts itched. With Nura's grudging approval, he led a mixed crew through the narrow crack, dropping into a network of low tunnels. Hours later, they had mapped a dead-end chamber with embedded crownstones and more unreadable carvings. No obvious controls, no sudden enlightenment, just more stone and more exhaustion. By mid-afternoon, his legs felt like lead. Back in the hall, the light was harsh, the air thin. His suit's readouts warned of fatigue. He smiled at Pavel's suggestion that he return to camp and insisted he was fine. He made it as far as one of the central pillars. He leaned his back against the cool, etched surface, intending to rest for a minute before the long walk out of the hall. The faint vibrations against his spine were oddly soothing. Just a minute, he told himself. Then debrief. His eyes slid shut. On a scaffold above, 2 Threxul technicians in harnesses watched him slump down. One shift and he drops, one muttered in Threxul, soft species. The other hissed a quiet laugh. He sleeps on the artifacts themselves. If the builders are watching, they will be offended. Near the perimeter, Kyra heard the translation in her earpiece. Her jaw tightened. She lifted her camera and framed Ilias leaning against the pillar, dust smudging his suit, head tipped forward, not heroic, not dignified, but obviously human. She panned to include the smirking Threxul. The hall, for the moment, was still. In Ilias' dreams, it was not. Battlefields resurfaced, the crack and roar of artillery, the tight stink of smoke and melted composites. He remembered hauling a crushed door off a trapped soldier, holding a bridge against orders to abandon it because civilians were still streaming across. Between those sharp images, softer ones rose, music in a crowded bar after a week-long siege, his grandmother's low voice reciting stories in an old earth language. Fear, anger, sorrow, stubbornness, joy. His mind moved through them in complex, shifting patterns. Under his sleeping weight, the pillar's stone warmed. Deep beneath the hall, the planet's buried system stirred. For eons, the Auric Weave, an intricate network laced through Edda's crust, had dozed, sensing only the faintest triggers. It had felt the Threxul's brute force scans, the Aurun's careful whispers, the Gyron's analytical prods. None had matched the profile it waited for. Now through Ilias, a different pattern touched it. A mind that held contradictions comfortably, that had chosen restraint under fire and violence when pushed, that could empathize with strangers and still pull a trigger when he believed it necessary. The weave responded. Dust lifted in a barely visible puff. Fine lines on the pillar began to glow, tracing the carvings in a slow, spreading web. The light pulsed, faintly at first, then stronger, syncing with Ilias' heartbeat. On the scaffold, one Threxul's instrument squealed. Power surge. Origin. He cut himself off as the crownstone below shivered, then rose into the air. With a crystalline chime, it pulled free from centuries of sand and floated upward, its facets flickering. It pivoted until one face angled toward Ilias' sleeping form. All across the hall, other crownstones followed. One by one they lifted, dust cascading from their surfaces, forming a ring in the air. Each turned, orienting toward the same center. The pillars joined them. Segments that had seemed solid shifted along nearly frictionless seams. Upper sections twisted, the entire forest of stone bending in a controlled collective motion. From above, the hall's layout changed, once random arcs aligning into curved rows all facing inward. It looked like a circle of giants kneeling. Inside that circle, a human man slept at the base of a glowing pillar. The Threxul technicians gaped. Kyra's camera shook once, then steadied as she fought to keep the shot framed. Pillars bathed the scene in eerie light. Crownstones hovered like orbiting satellites. Tsul of the tides surged through the entrance, their tanks sloshing. Tendrils flared, instruments snapping into record mode. Measure every band, Tsul instructed their assistants. Field strength, frequency, harmonic content. This is a full awakening. Eric Shar landed lightly near the center, feathers ruffled, eyes wide. Is anyone hurt? Not yet, Kyra said, not lowering her camera. Unless you count his pride when he wakes up. A few moments later, alarms rang on Palimpsest's bridge. Nura demanded a live feed. The image of the hall, rearranged and glowing around a single human, filled the main display. Skal Draenith arrived in the hall with Dominion guards, staring up at the bowing pillars and hovering stones. His scales darkened with anger and, despite himself, something like awe. "What have you done?" he demanded. Threxul's colors shifted impatiently. "He fell asleep, envoy. The weave did the rest." "Secure him," Skal snapped to his guards. Now, they approached Ilias cautiously, boots crunching on fresh dust. One reached out. The weave answered instantly. Crownstones snapped into a tighter ring, a few dropping to hover inches from Ilias' body. An invisible force slammed the guard backward, armor sparking as he hit the ground. The second guard's weapon jerked from its holster and sailed into a crack in the floor, vanishing. The floor itself rose under the first guard, pushing him up and away, pinning him gently against one of the hovering stones. The message was clear: do not touch. Ilias jolted awake. His first sensation was weightless fear. Above him, edges of stone hung like the blades of a guillotine, except they did not fall. They circled, keeping a careful, constant distance as he scrambled to his feet. He turned slowly, seeing the ring of bent pillars, the stunned faces of Aurun and Gyron and Threxul, the camera lens glinting as Kyra recorded. "What is happening?" he managed. The hall replied with a deep, sonorous vibration that rolled through every chest. Threxul floated closer. "Dr. Kade," they said, translator soft, "I believe Edda's Auric Weave has identified you as a primary interface." "It likes you," Kyra added. "A lot." "I was asleep," he protested weakly. "Apparently that was the right way to say hello," Isil said, arriving breathless from the entrance. What followed upended more than one worldview. Under controlled observation, Ilias stood in the hall connected to monitoring gear. When he relaxed and remembered peaceful moments, the light in the pillars pulsed softly, crownstones drifting in slow spirals. When he recalled pulling people from rubble or holding a shield line under incoming fire, the hall's architecture adjusted, forming flows and barriers along potential attack paths. Other humans triggered lesser reactions. Aurun and Gyron volunteers produced faint glows, minor shifts. Threxul produced almost nothing at all. "The weave is tuned to a certain cognitive emotional pattern," Threxul concluded in a tense briefing under the main camp tent. "It wants minds that can hold contradiction, that lean toward protection even after being shaped by violence. Humans exhibit this strongly. Dr. Kade, with his particular history, more strongly than most." Skal's response was immediate and sharp. "This cannot stand," he said flatly. "You expect the Dominion to accept that an unstable young species alone can fully wake precursor technology?" Jonah Raman, newly arrived Terran admiral, held Skal's gaze. "No one's asking you to accept anything yet," he said. "We're still gathering data. You should also consider," Threxul said carefully, "that the weave itself pushes back when Dr. Kade focuses on pure aggression. The pain responses are significant. The system encourages restraint." "That assumes your human can resist temptation," Skal replied. "History suggests otherwise. History also suggested what would happen if they mishandled the moment: war." The Trispiral Council, briefed in emergency session, oscillated between fear and opportunity. Some delegates argued for sealing Edda permanently. Others wanted to bring Ilias under council control. Some human factions quietly urged Jonah to seize the advantage and use Edda as leverage. Ilias, caught in the middle, asked for one concrete thing: let him and a small team follow the Weave's guidance into the deeper structure it kept hinting at, the Stillstar Vault. There, he hoped, they might learn the Auric Continuum's intentions directly. Under safeguards and with all major powers observers, the expedition descended. The Weave formed a path as they walked, stones extruding steps, corridors opening along lines of glowing script. At the bottom, in a high, round chamber, they found the Auric Codex. It looked like a shallow basin of light. When Ilias approached with a tethered legacy key, Pavel's hybrid interface device, images exploded in his mind. He saw the Auric Continuum in their final centuries, a civilization capable of engineering stars and sculpting worlds, growing tired and hollow. Factions arguing over what to do with their accumulated power. One faction wanted to bury it all. Another wanted to groom one species to inherit it entirely. A third, quieter group argued for a harder path, leave their infrastructure accessible only to minds that had learned, through struggle, to choose restraint despite the easy availability of destruction. Ilias saw models of worlds seeded with small chances, climates nudged, asteroid strikes softened. Earth appeared among them not as a special favorite but as one of many experiments that did not fail. They interfered, he said aloud, voice rough as the vision faded. They shaped our chances. But we still made ourselves. Many worlds were nudged, Sewell replied. Few responded with the pattern the weave requires. Humanity is not a puppet, you are a rare convergence. Deeper down, the Convergence Engine glowed. In a chamber studded with crystals, a strange map hung in the air, not distance but connectedness. Points of light marked other Auric sites scattered through space. Some flared brightly, some barely flickered. When Ilias stepped closer, the map flared. Lines extended, nodes brightened. It was as if the entire network had felt Edda's awakening and was waiting to see what its new interlocutors would do. Above, the Taloned Omen's commander watched Edda's power curves rise and felt something else awaken in him, fear. His orders were explicit. If another species claimed a decisive edge, the Dominion could not stand aside. He sent coded instructions to hidden fleet elements. Reinforcements burned hard toward Edda. When they arrived, they did so under the guise of additional stabilization forces, but their vectors gave them away. They did not form a protective shell, they aligned for a strike. The commander's ultimatum came quickly. All Auric-related assets, including the human interface subject, are to be surrendered to Dominion custody, he broadcast. Refusal will be treated as hostile intent. The Trispiral Council stalled. Orun and Gyron delegates protested. Jonah refused, knowing that if he yielded Ilias, Terran credibility and perhaps the Weave's trust were gone. The Taloned Omen's shuttles dropped through Edda's atmosphere regardless. On the surface, Nura deployed human security. Orun and Gyron forces took positions with varying enthusiasm. Everyone knew what would happen if any side panicked. In the Stillstar Vault, warning icons flashed around Ilias. They're coming, Pavel said. Armed and not subtle, Ilias felt the Weave's awareness focus. It tasted the incoming heat, the converging threats. It was ready to act and ready to be steered. You can stop them, Jonah's voice crackled over a secure channel from orbit. You know that, the question is how. Ilias closed his eyes, fingers tightening around the legacy key. If he chose to lash out, the Weave would oblige. It could seize the Dominion ships, reactors, twist gravity, tear metal like cloth. The fastest path to safety lay that way. He remembered the Auric debates, the quiet faction that had insisted on restraint. He remembered his own worst temptations on battlefields, moments when rage almost overrode judgment. I won't be the man who proves them right to fear us, he said. What then? Nura asked. We share this, he answered. Spread the burden, the decisions, the power. Isil and Sewell had already sketched a concept. A resonant accord, linking multiple minds through the weave so no single consciousness could dominate. It had been theory. Now there was no time for cautious trials. We can patch others into the legacy key, Pavel said, hands moving fast. Bandwidth will be tight. You'll all feel each other. Volunteers stepped forward anyway. Sewell, because curiosity and duty both demanded they understand this more deeply. Nura, because she would not let her subordinate carry the load alone. Auric, because his tactical analysis told him dispersed control was better than a single point of failure. Kyra, because someone needed to represent non-military lives and ask always, at what cost? They took their places around the legacy key. Pavel initiated the link. It slid into place like a new sense. Each of them felt the others as cooler or warmer currents at the edges of their own thoughts. Ilias tasted Sewell's layered, spiral logic, Nura's disciplined will, Auric's structured hierarchy of duty, Kyra's restless habit of imagining every person as the center of their own story. The weave embraced the braid. Instantly, Edda became a body under their shared awareness. They felt weaknesses in the soil, the tensile strength of stone, the buzzing anxiety of smaller minds on the surface. Above the Dominion fleet was a ring of hot points wrapped in fragile shells of metal and pride. Assault craft screamed down. On the plain near the hull, landers blazed in, weapons hot. Threxul troops poured out in disciplined formations. Some aimed for the hull, others for human and Aurun positions. The group's joint intent crystallized without words. Protect lives, limit harm, demonstrate control. The Weave bent space and force accordingly. Dropships that should have slammed into the hull's perimeter hit invisible cushions instead, momentum redirected into sideways skids. They plowed trenches in the sand and came to rest, battered but intact. Troops stumbled out and found their shots slowing mid-flight, pulled off course by subtle distortions. Around the Aurun hydration tanks, gravity pivoted under attacking Threxul feet. Their charges became long, slow leaps, easily sidestepped. One warrior's shot froze in the air and drifted away as time thickened around it. Kyra flinched as a bolt crawled past her like a lazy comet, heat barely brushing her cheek. Through the link, Kyra's spike of fear mingled with Auric's tactical clarity and Nura's command reflexes, redirecting Ilias' raw urge to strike back into finer control. On the hall's floor, sections rose and fell, herding attackers into pockets where gravity deepened. They collapsed under their own weight, pinned but unbroken. Weapons rose from the sand as if plucked by invisible hands and tucked into stone alcoves out of reach. Above, the taloned Omen tried to bring its main guns to bear. Through the shared awareness, the linked minds watched its reactors spool, its fire control systems align. They felt the Threxul commander's determination harden. He intended to fire even if it meant devastating Edda's surface. Ilias' anger flared. He thought briefly of letting the Weave break that ship apart as a lesson. Through the Accord, Nura felt that thought and showed him, wordlessly, the faces of the crew, most of them young, most following orders as he once had. Threxul overlaid a memory of Auric simulations of civilizations destroyed by single, catastrophic acts. Kyra added a flash of potential footage. A ship ripped open, bodies spilling into vacuum, a horror that would define humanity in the eyes of the galaxy. Together they chose another path. The Weave wrapped the taloned Omen in a cage of distorted space. Its guns cycled, but their energy had nowhere to go. Beams bent back and folded harmlessly along the ship's hull, dissipating as faint auroras. Engines strained, but thrust slipped sideways. Slowly, gently, the massive warship's orbit warped. It arced out of firing position, stalled, and settled into a high, powerless trajectory. It was disarmed, not destroyed. The same fate met its escorts. Engines went quiet. Weapons failed. Gravity tugs diverted their momentum into safe, if humiliating, drifts. On the surface, pinned Threxul troops watched their own fleet go silent and felt, some of them for the first time, a genuine fear of what it meant to be completely at another's mercy. The linked minds felt that fear too. They could have squeezed, tightened the fields, broken bones with a thought. They did not. Instead, one by one, they relaxed local distortions. Dominion soldiers dropped gently to the sand, disoriented but alive. Human, Aurun, and Gyron teams moved in carefully, weapons ready but muzzles not leveled at heads. The hall's glow eased to a steady, throbbing pulse. In the vault, the Accord loosened. Disconnection felt like stepping out of a roaring river into a small, private room. Ilias reeled. Nura grabbed a bulkhead. Threxul's tendrils fluttered with aftershocks. Auric flexed his talons, suddenly aware again of where his own mind ended. Kyra leaned against the wall, laughing once, half in relief, half in disbelief. "You did it," Pavel said, voice hoarse with awe. "You all did it." "Not yet," Jonah's voice came from orbit. "Now comes the part where we convince everyone else not to panic." Panic was unavoidable, but catastrophe for the moment had been averted. The Trispiral Council could not deny what had happened. Multiple ships had recorded the Dominion's attempt to seize the site, and the Weave's non-lethal neutralization of that attempt. Kyra's footage of the hull bending around a sleeping human and later rising to protect multiple species spread through media channels, reshaped and reinterpreted, but unmistakable in its core. In hastily called assemblies on Caltris Ring, delegates argued over the implications. Some demanded that all Auric sites be off-limits. Others called for humanity to be isolated before it could form a monopoly on precursor tech. Human representatives argued, not entirely convincingly, that they had just demonstrated restraint. The result, hammered out over long hours, was the Auric Accord. No Auric installation would be activated without multi-species participation. Any deep link to a Weave node would be made through a Resonant Accord structure, with mandated representation from at least 3 of the major polities. Human anchors would be recognized as necessary, but never sufficient, participants. The Terran Pact gained prestige and leverage, but also accepted intrusive monitoring and shared oversight that would have been politically impossible only months earlier. The Threxul Dominion, nursing a mix of indignation and relief, began a painful internal reassessment. Some among them argued that humans had shown dangerous potential. Others, secretly at first, admitted that being spared destruction when it would have been easy to inflict it had shaken old certainties. On Edda itself, life settled into a new rhythm. The Hall of Still Suns no longer felt entirely alien. Its pillars retained their strange grace, but now they also radiated a subtle sense of attention, as if listening. Crownstones drifted occasionally into new patterns when Accord teams entered, greeting different mind blends with different physical configurations. Ilias did not become a permanent priest of the ruins. His nervous system had paid a price. Even with the legacy keys buffering, his first deep links had scarred some pathways. He woke some nights at 3 a.m. with flashes of the Convergence Engine star map burning behind his eyelids. He returned to the hall less often, and when he did, it was usually as an observer or secondary participant in Accord sessions. Other humans took turns in the center. Engineers, diplomats, even a few cautious dreamers selected for their capacity to balance passion with restraint. One evening, as Edda's small moon rose low on the horizon, Kyra found him standing alone beneath a pillar, watching crownstones drift. Regretting waking the planet, she asked. He considered. Sometimes, he admitted. It was simpler when humans were just another upstart species with noisy ships and small ambitions. But, she prompted. But then I remember the Auric Codex, he said, eyes on the glowing stone. That they built all this hoping someone would eventually prove worthy of not using it like a hammer. It's something being told your species past their first threshold. First, Kyra said, you think there are more. I think that map in the Convergence Engine wasn't just old, he said. When we activated Edda, some of those distant nodes brightened. Something out there is listening, maybe waking. She shivered, imagining the possibilities, then raised her camera. People back home will want to know what happens next, she said. So do I, he replied. She recorded him there, a small human figure framed by bowed stone and hovering relics, speaking calmly about responsibilities that would have crushed earlier generations. Far beyond Edda in the deep stretches between stars, faint auric points pulsed in answer. On one nameless world, a buried crownstone rose an inch from ancient dust, testing the air. On Edda, under the hall that had bent for a sleeping human and then for a linked circle of minds, people from different species argued over timetables and safety limits, learning the difficult art of sharing what could not safely belong to anyone alone. For now, the Auric Weave watched and waited, measuring every choice. For now, that was enough.